We live in a world that is rapidly changing, and as TESOL professionals, we're being called upon to help people solve real problems that extend far beyond the classroom and beyond our own content expertise. In fact, it's quite likely that we could be asked to develop a course in a content area that we know nothing about. How exactly do you build a course in disaster management, climate change, artificial intelligence, or any topic for that matter? And what do you do when your students know more about the topic than you do? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. My name's Alicia Brent.
And I'm Lisa Donahoe, and this is our Specialist Masterclass. We'll share our story of how we designed and delivered an ESP course in disaster management, a subject we knew nothing about. Using a content-based instruction approach, we learn not only how to leverage ESP to bridge linguistic and cultural gaps, we learn to empower people through communication and collaboration, and in doing so, make a global impact.
English is a common language for issues where international collaboration is necessary. So topics like disaster management, cybersecurity, the environment, global pandemics, even peacekeeping and diplomacy are possible content areas in ESP. In fact, there are infinite possibilities. And as the world becomes more and more interconnected, TESOL professionals can make a real impact by asking critical questions about how people communicate and collaborate in their fields, both globally and locally.
Right, and our impact really depends on leveraging learners' content expertise, one of the many challenges in delivering a content-based ESP course. I remember the time when you and I were working with a group of civil servants in southern India for our program in English for Disaster Management, and we were faced with an extremely diverse group of students who are working at different levels within the state and local government.
There were taluk or village level officers with very limited English abilities, working mostly in person-to-person situations in the local language. They didn't even work with computers, and this was a hybrid course. And then there were the district level officers from higher castes who had studied mostly in English medium schools and in some cases came from pretty elite families. All this could have a significant impact on the classroom dynamics. So we had to figure out how to navigate this socially awkward learning environment.
At first, we thought it was going to be our own little disaster in the classroom. But what started as an uncomfortable mix of social and professional interactions turned into a sharing of ideas and expertise in disaster management up and down the levels of government. It was so interesting to see firsthand how the ESP classroom really encourages meaningful interaction.
It was so amazing. The taluk officers, despite their limited English, brought their on-the-ground experience to the table, which is critical in a disaster. And then the district administrators were able to apply that knowledge to the disaster response framework, which we'll talk about later on in the course. We were able to leverage our learners' expertise to help them engage more effectively in English. Together, they not only learned the communication skills that we were teaching them, they also learned about how each of their roles played a critical part in disaster response, allowing them to move beyond the social hierarchies and build long-term professional relationships.
And our course made this interaction possible. That's the beauty of ESP, and as a professional in TESOL, it doesn't get much better than that.
Right, but what did we TESOL professionals know about disaster management?
We knew nothing.
But we learned a lot, and in the end, we successfully delivered our course in India and then in Southeast Asia. We'll share with you this fascinating journey of partnership building, needs assessment, program design, development, and delivery, as well as the many challenges and lessons learned along the way.
Let's start our story by establishing some common ground for our concepts and terms. Many in our TESOL community are familiar with English for specific purposes, but let's talk a little bit about how ESP relates to CBI, content-based instruction. One of my favorite go-to books is this one, The Content-Based Classroom by Britton and Snow. They pose the question, are ESP and CBI distant relatives, or are they kissing cousins? We like to think of CBI as an offspring of ESP or as an approach to curriculum design in the extended family of approaches within ESP. We've included a review of ESP and CBI in the supplementary readings for this course, so here I'd like to highlight the feature that unites all the various branches of ESP, which is a commitment to the learner's purpose. That purpose drives all other decisions in the course development process, and it points us to the critical content and critical perspectives that are relevant to our learners and integral to their profession in the world, such as in responding effectively to crises and disasters. This critical content is reflected in other courses we've designed on nuclear security, intercultural competence, diplomacy, and conflict resolution, all with a focus on the communicative functions needed in those contexts. Because CBI is communicative, making use of communicative language teaching in the delivery phase, it emphasizes communicative competence in the learner. But what makes CBI such an empowering form of ESP is its focus on learner autonomy through learner analysis of the subject matter. That is, discourse modeled in real-world or authentic professional materials. It is through discourse analysis, together with the learner's awareness of their own internal learning process, that CBI students develop a deeper grasp of the nuances of language and context, and build the confidence to make the language choices appropriate to that context. We witnessed this transformation when our diplomats from Korea, Japan, and Taiwan engage in trade negotiations, or when the disaster response students collaborate in tabletop planning for an international crisis, each playing an actual high-level role in planning for a rapid response situation. They first read different critical perspectives in the real-world materials that we assign, and then represent and argue those perspectives, sometimes even arguing the position of their real-world adversaries, which can be very uncomfortable. In this way, learners have already mastered their roles in similar events in the real professional world. Another empowering aspect of CBI is the interaction, not mainly between the teachers and students, but mostly between the students themselves in groups with mixed content knowledge or language proficiency. The tasks and activities we assign encourage learners' use of language in the social context of negotiating a territorial dispute or settling a conflict in a crisis. Through collaboration, they not only increase their communicative competence in English, they solve real-world problems together. The best example is Alicia's story about the village-level taluk and the district-level civil servants. By collaborating in tabletop exercises for disaster response, these two groups of people who would not have had many opportunities to communicate learned about each other and the value that each of them brings to the crisis response. They gain critical perspectives that they may not have been exposed to otherwise, and these new perspectives were incorporated into their real-world functions in disaster response. When the historic flood hit Kerala while our students were still in the online portion of the course, we witnessed the trust that had been built between the groups in their real-time WhatsApp communications while they were responding. So yes, there are some unique aspects of CBI as a specific approach under the larger ESP umbrella. So from now on, in this masterclass, it's assumed that when we use the term ESP, we are referring to this CBI approach.
The goals of ESP go far beyond language learning. Communicative competence in a specific content area can really open doorways for professional collaboration at so many levels. One form of collaboration that stands out the most to me is the opportunity for learners to hone their communication skills in English in order to collaborate across borders. Our English Communications for Disaster Management program did just that. After we piloted it in India, we delivered it in Indonesia, where the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has their headquarters for disaster relief. The course provided the opportunity for public officials from these 10 member countries of ASEAN to discuss disaster-related topics in English and to collaborate on projects related to disaster relief in the region at a level that would not have been possible otherwise. Our course was a catalyst for these important conversations, and our students' ability to engage in English at a professional level with colleagues that would later become part of their network was both motivating and empowering for them.
That is really the gratifying result of our efforts, when our students increase not only their proficiency, but their confidence in using English in their professional contexts. Several years ago, a former student, Lily, an infectious disease scientist from the Republic of Georgia, proudly told me she was able to engage with visiting scientists without an interpreter and deliver a presentation in English at the American Society of Microbiologists. That's an international conference of 15,000 attendees. Our current experience with a global pandemic reminds us of the vital importance of communicative competence in a common language for solving real-world global problems. Another example of the empowerment of communication occurred during the December 2019 typhoons in the Philippines. One of our disaster management learners, an incident commander in Malaysia, traveled to Manila to coordinate response with another of our learners from the Philippines. English was their shared language, which they had practiced in simulated tabletop planning in our course, building trust in their own knowledge and skills. In this way, CBI supports capacity building within professional communities at the local, regional, and international levels. Through person-to-person engagement, these professional networks are strengthened and can serve as real communities of practice.
Although the course content was at times overwhelming, and we had a lot to discover about our learners, this journey in disaster management was incredibly rewarding for everyone. We joined our learners on this journey, and as is often the case, the teacher becomes the learner at some point. Through this experience, we learned about the key players in disaster relief, internationally and regionally. We learned how the world responds to international crises, and how people in the field communicate both horizontally and vertically, from the village level on up the chain of command to the national and international response centers. We learned about discourse styles in various relief contexts, terminology and acronyms in the complex system of disaster response, and we learned that people around the world are dedicated to responding to disasters that can turn lives and economies upside down, and that the quality of their communication in English can mean the difference between life and death. And that is the power of ESP.